Welcome to the Empire of Ideas. Be sure to check out the American Civil War playlist to follow the events of the Civil War era, its consequential moments, speeches, battles, and much more. In today's video, we are exploring the Pratt Street Riot of 1861, April 19, 1861, Baltimore, Maryland. The cobblestone streets echoed with the rumble of train wheels and distant drums of Civil War. On Pratt Street, the city held its breath, then exploded in violence. North met South not on the battlefield, but in the heart of a divided American city. The first blood of Union soldiers would not be spilled by Confederate armies, but by American citizens. Before the smoke rose in Baltimore, the United States had already begun to tear at the seams. Abraham Lincoln's election in November 1860 triggered a wave of Southern secessions. By April 1861, the Confederate States of America had declared their break from the Union. On April 12, 1861, the first shots were fired at Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, and Lincoln responded by calling for 75,000 volunteers to suppress the rebellion. This call to arms pushed the border states into a fever pitch. One such state, Maryland, stood dangerously divided. Although Maryland remained in the Union, many of its citizens sympathized with the South. Baltimore, the state's largest city, was a powder keg of pro-Southern sentiment, political instability, and fierce local identity. When Union troops attempted to pass through the city, that powder keg was lit. The arrival of the 6th Massachusetts Regiment. On the morning of April 19th, the 6th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry, under the command of Colonel Edward F. Jones, was en route to Washington, D.C. to answer Lincoln's call for troops. Their journey took them by rail through Baltimore, but the city's unusual rail system created a deadly vulnerability. Baltimore's regulations prohibited trains from passing directly through the city center. Passengers had to disembark at the President Street station, and their train cars were drawn across town to Camden Station by horses along Pratt Street, a straight, narrow artery through a volatile working-class district. The 6th Massachusetts had no illusions about Baltimore's loyalties. Colonel Jones had even received a warning from the mayor of Philadelphia that Baltimore posed a real threat. But the orders were clear: reach Washington at all costs. The riot erupts. The first few cars passed without incident, but as the later cars containing Union troops rolled along Pratt Street, a mob of secessionist sympathizers gathered. They shouted insults. They hurled bricks. Then came gunfire. When the tracks became blocked by debris and the mob, 4 companies of the 6th Massachusetts were forced to march through the streets on foot. It was then that the city ignited. Hundreds of civilians, many of them armed, attacked the soldiers with clubs, stones, pistols, and knives. Shots were fired in all directions. The soldiers, under attack and outnumbered, returned fire in a desperate attempt to push through the mob. By the time they reached Camden Station, 4 soldiers were dead, 36 were wounded, and 12 civilians lay dead, the first civilian casualties of the Civil War. The survivors boarded their train and continued to Washington, but the damage was done. Baltimore, a city caught between allegiances, had drawn first blood on the Union. Aftermath and political consequences. The Pratt Street riot sent shockwaves through the nation. President Lincoln now faced a horrifying reality. The route to the nation's capital ran through hostile territory. The security of Washington, D.C. was suddenly in question. Within days, Union troops began seizing strategic points in Maryland to prevent further rebellion. Baltimore's Mayor George W. Brown and Governor Thomas Hicks, both pro-Union but sympathetic to Southern concerns, pleaded for calm. But they also cut telegraph wires, destroyed railroad bridges, and temporarily halted Union troop movements to appease the city's rage. Lincoln responded with swift martial authority. He suspended habeas corpus in Maryland, ordering the arrest of pro-Confederate legislators and city officials who threatened Union control. One of the most notable arrests was that of John Merryman, a Maryland state militia officer, an act that would result in the famous legal case Ex parte Merryman, challenging Lincoln's wartime powers. By late May 1861, Union troops under General Benjamin Butler had occupied Baltimore, enforcing martial law and restoring order, but not before the city had become a flashpoint of divided American identity. Legacy of the Riot. The Pratt Street riot was more than a mob clash. It was a symbolic turning point. It revealed how the Civil War was not just fought on distant battlefields, but also in the hearts of American cities, in the minds of divided citizens, and in the streets where neighbors became enemies. It also marked a grim milestone: the first Union soldiers killed by fellow Americans. The North no longer viewed the rebellion as a distant Southern insurrection. The war had reached into the streets of the Union itself. Even today, a plaque along Pratt Street marks the location where the blood of Massachusetts soldiers mingled with that of Baltimore citizens, forever linking the city to the Civil War's earliest and most painful memories. Baltimore's bricks were soaked in blood before Bull Run ever fired a shot. The war wasn't waiting. It was already here. And in that April firestorm on Pratt Street, the illusion of unity shattered, replaced by the hard steel of Civil War.